All right. Thank you everyone for your patience. Want to give folks just a minute to come in. Bringing folks out of the waiting room can take a minute, so I appreciate everyone's patience. So welcome to our Prevention Peer Network webinar for December, at least our first one. So my name is Miranda Stiers. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm the Prevention Program Specialist with the partnership. I want to have my colleague introduce themselves, and then we'll introduce our panel and move forward.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcella Maggio, she, her, hers, and I am the prevention coordinator and storyteller for the partnership. Really excited for y'all to join us this morning and talk about podcasts, the power of them, from a listener and also from someone who wants to share their wealth in whatever format that looks like. And podcasts really being one that is intimate and one that connects us from the head to the heart, literally. So I'm so excited that you're here. We have some incredible guests who are going to share their stories of that idea and put it into playtime. We will be bringing them on. We have, I apologize, I'm going to butcher the name. I should have done this prior to. So actually, if I could have you all introduce yourselves so that way I don't butcher the names, I know what that feels like. So I will lead it over to HARRT with Roni first.
Hi, my name is Roni. I'm with Haven Women's Center. I lead a HARRT group. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Lanius. I'm an educator in the field of higher education and doing a study on domestic violence, financial education. Same pronouns as Roni. Thank you.
And do our SAFE folks want to introduce themselves?
Sure. Hi, I'm Shailaja. I'm from SAVE. We are a domestic violence service provider, and we are based in Fremont. I am a community engagement specialist with SAVE. Thank you for having me here today.
And Chao, you're muted, or I'm not able to hear you.
So, oh wait, hold on. And can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Chao. I'm also with SAVE. My pronouns is she, her, hers, and my role at SAVE is development manager. Thank you for having us.
All right, thank you so much. Just a couple of housekeeping things for folks. We do record the webinars and this will be posted. So I know life can happen. Kids may need help with their virtual schooling, all kinds of things happen. So if you have to step out at any point, know that this will be recorded and uploaded to our resource library. If you want to be on camera, you absolutely can. If you choose not to, that is absolutely okay as well. You can expand your audio. So if you have any trouble hearing at any point, if you are listening through the computer, you can click the little arrow that is next to your audio and switch to call in. Video can be disabled, as I said. You can also see who is joining us today. And if you want to send direct messages or a message to us or to our panelists, then you can absolutely do that through the chat. And there are some reaction buttons on there. So if you're feeling like you need to ask us to slow down or go faster, then please let us know. I personally have a really bad habit of speaking very rapidly, so I try to be mindful. As we get started today, we are going to be having our opening circle and giving folks a chance to introduce themselves and let us know where they're calling in from. Our folks have introduced themselves and we are going to be talking about how to facilitate podcasts. So our panel is going to be sharing some of their experiences in their programs. We're going to have time for questions and answers, and then we should have some discussion space afterwards for any questions that folks may have. And before we get started, we wanted to do a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory and homelands of California Native peoples. These nations include over 120 federally recognized tribes and many other non-recognized tribes that are all very culturally diverse. We thank these nations for their generosity and we keep them in our hearts and thoughts as we are in this space today, this week, and every day. And let me find I know we have that. Perfect. Thank you, Marcella, for coming in with it. You can actually follow the link of native-land.ca and see the land that you're on. So we're going to turn it over for folks to go ahead and introduce themselves. So you can do it in the chat, or if you want to unmute, either way. Please feel free to give us your name, agency, and location. We'd love to hear where folks are coming in from.
Jeremy, let's do that.
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. It's great. We have folks from all over. And I love that folks are finding where their native lands are. The folks are. All right, so keep those introductions coming in. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roni.
Good morning. Like I said, I'm Roni. I'm from Haven Women's Center of Stanislaus, and I work in the youth department. And I help facilitate an after-school group called HARRT, which stands for Healthy and Responsible Relationships Troop. And basically, we recruit and teach students about adolescent relationship abuse and how to advocate for themselves and their peers. So with COVID, it looks a little bit different. We only have a few schools participating right now, but the students that we work with are incredible leaders and advocates, and they're so smart. Part of the curriculum that we go through is explaining abuse, different types of abuse, what that looks like, boundaries, gender stereotypes, privilege, just a big spectrum of things. And their main goal is to provide a safe space for them to learn and teach, and to also share if that is what they feel like doing. And before we were in classrooms, and we could do in-person activities and have them, put together puzzles or write on the boards and, sit in circles and stuff like that. But like I said, with COVID, it's become a little bit more challenging. So we had to find a way to transfer that safe space into a virtual space, which felt really odd in the beginning. And so we focused mostly on providing a space for them to just talk to us about their anxieties and their fears, and just if they wanted to sit and color and just kind of relax and feel a little bit normal, or participate and visit with their friends and other classmates, then that's what we did for the day. This summer, I think, was very tense, and I think incredibly hard for the students. I remember specifically around the Black Lives Matter movement and the start of that, I heard a lot of my students feeling like they couldn't do much. They wanted to do more. They couldn't go out and vote. They couldn't go and march. Their parents didn't want them to march or protest in their own towns and cities and stuff. So, and I've heard this a lot, not only that they couldn't do as much as they wanted to, but because of their age group, that adults didn't listen as much, and they didn't feel as heard, right? We know that that teenagers feel things very intensely, and that's their brain chemistry. And we know as adults being through that and coming out of that, that eventually will change. But that's very real to them in that moment, right? So the best thing that we can do is just listen and meet them where they're at and take them very seriously, that this is how they're experiencing the world. And you know, being that safe person where they can come to you and feel heard. So because of that and the virtual space and trying to figure out how we could all interact with each other, the podcast was kind of born out of that. So we started a podcast called the HARRT podcast, Teens Against Violence, Domestic Violence. And we wanted to create a platform where they could talk and be heard, whether they were just talking to each other and teaching and advocating like they were when they were in school, or they were just talking about the adjustment to COVID and how that was weird and different. But yeah, so I want to play for you just the beginning of one of my favorite episodes. So let me do that here. Okay.
This is the HARRT Club Coalition. So we have a few people from different schools. And we're here to talk about consent. So I'm Paris Moore. I'm from Pittman High School. I'm going into my senior year. Woo.
I'm Cassie Tortorelli. I'm from Bayer and I'm going into my senior year.
I'm Vanessa Archer. I go to Pittman as well, and I'm also going into my senior year.
So, I guess starting us off, what is consent? Well, consent is something that has to be given. Vanessa, I think you had a really good definition, very straightforward.
Yes, I wrote that consent is an agreement made in non-sexual and sexual activities to keep moving forward, and just a note that this is allowed to be changed at any time.
Yeah, so I think generally it's mostly used in regards to something sexual, but it can really be given to anything. Like it could be emotional, like talking about something that's really heavy, or physical, you know, kissing, touching, hugging, anything friendly, not necessarily sexual. There's a lot of different things that could be related to consent, if that even makes sense. I don't know. Anyways. What about you, Cassie? What's consent to you?
Consent to me is, like you guys have said, it's given for any action, but it's also very enthusiastic, and it's an audible yes. It is never just like a nod or an okay, sure. It's a yes, I want to do this.
Okay, so that was our episode, beginning of our episode on consent. And I really am just so proud of these students. This is how the conversations went every time we had, we were explaining curriculum or we were just having a discussion. And they've talked about a lot of things. Our podcast is still very young. We're 3 episodes in. The first episode was our Davis school talking about just the adjustment to COVID and how crazy and weird that was. And the second episode was Pittman talking about mental health and how important mental wellness was, and how the media and, shows on Netflix and whatever can be really damaging and kind of romanticize this we talked about the 13 Reasons Why, and that show, Joe, what's the show? It doesn't matter, but the stalker guy, and how like that romanticized this person who is obsessed with someone and would kill for them and whatever, and how truly that is maybe entertaining on some level, but can be incredibly damaging and super unhealthy. So that was our second episode. And then our third, of course, was about consent. And in that episode, they go on to say that there are more good examples of consent in shows that are aimed at a younger audience, like cartoons and stuff like that. But when you go to watch something that is aimed towards teenagers or young adults or whatever, the consent is either like not shown at all or shown in such a damaging way. And they have some really beautiful, beautiful insights on that, and how they want to advocate for better examples of all of those things in the media, and they want consent to be talked about more, and all of that. So I listen to a lot of podcasts myself, like a lot. I think I would rather listen to people talk than music at some point sometimes. So I had a little bit of insight onto where to go to start doing that, right? So we started on Zoom and we just started recording. And the next thing was figuring out how to edit those things, especially when you're talking in a podcast setup, things can be awkward, and students talk really fast, or they don't talk very clear, or they're talking over each other. So we had to figure out what that looked like. That lots of trial and error with that. And I just did a quick Google search, like what's the best for editing podcasts, and that led me to Audacity, and I'll show you what that looks like. This is Audacity. It's super simple. It's really, really user-friendly. I truly believe if I can do it, anyone can do it. But it's really easy to manipulate. You can, pretty self-explanatory, upload stuff here and move stuff around and edit things and then export out. Pretty simple. And it's totally free. Totally free. Let me see if I can find, oh yes, here it is. This is the website for that, and you can download it. And there are so many YouTubes about this and how to be better. And what I love about this is that it creates something to teach our students how to do as well. We have a lot of really creative students and a lot of students who really know tech much better than I ever will understand. And they take to this like water. And it's eventually something, if they can download it on their own and they want to take responsibility for this whole thing, then eventually this whole podcast can just be them, and we're just there to cheer them on. And I always say that I'm just here to fill the awkward silences with like terrible jokes, just to like loosen them up and keep them talking and stuff. The next thing is we have all of this edited, right, and ready to go. So where do we put that? Like I said, I listened to a billion podcasts, and there was an advertisement on a few of those for something called Anchor. And Anchor is also totally free and really user-friendly, which is amazing. And let me see. Looks like this. So our live site looks like this, anchor.fm/the HARRT podcast. And when you come, you can see our little graphic here, which I made on Canva, super easy. And then the best thing about Anchor is that it distributes stuff for you, depending on how you describe your podcast, what category you put that in, and then it distributes it for you. So these are all the places you can find our podcast down here. Like the Spotify, I opened my own Spotify app. I searched the HARRT podcast, and up popped our students, and a little tear came to my eye. I was so proud that they're on Spotify. But they're also on like Castbox and iTunes, iPodcasts, or whichever. And here are all of our episodes right here. So super simple. And the other thing I love about this is that you can really easily not only upload your stuff, but you can record right to Anchor if that is something that you want to do. You can pre-upload all of your stuff here and just go in and make them live and stuff. You can add your own music if you want. And then when people want to message you, or I think they can leave like little voice messages for you and stuff, then you can see all of this stuff here. One of the things that we do is we keep things like a trigger warning stock here. So this is Pittman's trigger warning.
Hi, listeners. This is Pittman's Heart Club, and before we get into the episode, we'd like to warn you that we are going to go over some possibly triggering or harmful subjects, such as mental health and suicide. This is a reminder to please listen at your own discretion. Thanks for listening. Hi, listeners.
And hotlines and stuff.
If you need to reach out for help, or if you know someone who needs help, the Haven Women's Center 24/7 crisis hotline is 209-577-5980. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 1-800-273-8255, or text HOME to 741-741.
And then like we did a sponsors thank you.
Thank you again for listening. And a special thank you to our funders, Sutter Health,
Yeah, so you can upload a trigger warning and then upload your episode and then upload your hotlines and then a thank you, and then all that stuff is right here. Save episode, and then you can just make it live. Super, super simple. The girl who did the trigger warning and the hotlines actually just logged in with the login and recorded straight to Anchor and left them there, and I put them all in order and sent them out. Yeah. And the other thing about Anchor, which I think is super cool, is that you can get sponsorship right away. So the first sponsor you will get is actually Anchor, and then they will give you sponsors based on how many views that you have. You just have to make a little commercial. We're using Anchor, this is how you use it, and all of this stuff. So you can get direct sponsorship, and then from there it also will distribute to people and find you other sponsors, which I think is really, really cool. And so that's Anchor. I love that. You can also do an app. There's also an app on your phone. You can just record right to your phone and upload it. And then the last thing I think was the biggest help to me personally was a workshop center called the Story Center. They're out of Berkeley, California, and they are the best. I've done 2 workshops with them. I just finished the podcast workshop, I think this last Tuesday, and it was both classes that I took were so supportive and created such a beautiful space to create, and even just like blast your ideas out and say, okay, I have this idea. I don't know what this would look like, but whatever. And then the instructors in your little cohort will kind of help you through that. And it's helped me think about how I can help facilitate the same kind of thing with our students, right? Like there is, there's always an idea, whether you think it's good or bad, you know, and our students want to talk about so much. So how do we filter that and structure that and give them, you know, guidelines to create something that they think is good and that they want to share, and all of that. So I cannot recommend Story Center enough. I think they're just the bee's knees. But yeah, that's basically all I had. I have, other than that, Canva is what I use to make the little graphic, and that's super easy too. And but all of this is such a beautiful resource for anyone, but particularly our students, to have a creative outlet and still be in a space where they can feel heard and feel like they're doing something that means something, and not just be sitting on their hands in the house because they have to be, and that you know, the grown-ups out there are supposed to be taking care of things, and that they can't do anything. So I'm eternally grateful for this setup and this platform to do that, and to help them kind of get on their way. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Roni. That was wonderful. And yeah, I appreciate that, you know, the transparency with everything. Just the intention of, you know, why specifically with youth, even this time. 3 is more than I got, so more power to you. You have what sounds like, you know, really good foundation. Also finding these avenues, these tools. So that's, you know, that's one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to have this conversation, right? Is this is another tool to put in, you know, our toolboxes to make sure that either we're tuning in, we're listening to the power of these words, and or we're contributing to those, whether it is an interview, whether it is we are the interviewer and we are creating these spaces and these opportunities for young people and every people. So I don't know if there's any questions. I want to make sure. And yes, I appreciate all the resources because as someone who has been there, done that, and did not do it free. If you don't, if you're not smart about it, it could be costly. And I was not smart about it. So while we gather some questions and before we move on to our other, oh, we do have a question. Wonderful. Looks like Sarah Sullivan from Panelists asks, how long does it take you to edit each episode?
It depends on the episode, and it depends on the student's attention span. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes it's a little all over the place, or they're very giggly, which honestly, like if it takes me 3 or 4 hours because I'm cutting out giggles, like I'd rather that than anything else. But usually I'll sit down and edit for an hour. I think it usually takes me 2 hours for a whole episode that will end up like 45 minutes. That's after a lot of practice. Before, it was taking me a very, very long time. But like I said, with all the YouTube tutorials and now the podcast workshop, it becomes easier with time.
And does Audacity allow you to record from multiple remote devices at once? So the question is, so if you have people speaking on the podcast, can each record their part remotely through So
if someone else has Audacity on their computer, on their device, and we're on a Zoom meeting, then they can open Audacity and record into Audacity while they're talking on the Zoom meeting. And then after that, they would have to like save and send whoever is editing it, and then you can put all of those voices together. I actually did that for a different podcast for the workshop, and what we did was have 2 laptops. She was a friend of mine, so she came over, and she has like the same mic. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to say, is that I got this mic for Christmas. It's a Blue Yeti mic. It's like $50. It's super easy. It's got such a wonderful sound. It can be a little bit confusing because it doesn't give you like any instructions, but again, University of YouTube will teach you anything. One of my students has one as well, the girl who did all of the like trigger warnings and stuff. That's why she sounds so clear. Anyway, we had 2 laptops. She had her mic in front of her plugged into one. I had one in mine, and we both recorded to Audacity, sent the recording to me, and put it all together. That makes sense? You can also, the thing I learned in the workshop is if they have an iPhone and had like a headset, they can record right into their iPhone and then send that off to you, and the voice recording is super crystal clear. Yeah, so then, you know, people make it out to be. It's not as daunting.
So then the editing process, the meshing of those multiple voices, is that not as scary as it sounds?
Oh no, definitely not. So if you can do something before, like the tip for the workshop was like make 3 claps, right? Or 3 sounds, then it's in all of the recordings, you match those up, and then you can just take, like, if I'm asking a question and, you know, what a student is answering, then I can take my recording of my question and their recording of their answer, and then just kind of put the pieces together like that. It does sound like you're looking at it and you're like, oh my goodness, there's so many voices here, but it's the same conversation. And when you can see where you can tell where your voice is and their voice and stuff like that, it becomes super simple.
Nice. That's pretty cool too. Yeah, you're like becoming a techie through all this.
I know.
And another question,
Power.
were you connected with the students pre-pandemic?
Yes. So these are all students that we were actually on site with. So we would go to their high schools and do individual HARRT groups at Pittman with their facilitator, or at Davis and do curriculum. And like I said, we would do like gallery walks where we would put like a word like sexism and write down what you know about sexism or what you don't know about sexism and stuff like that. So yes. And I'm so grateful that they committed to coming to the virtual sessions of this, because, you know, they didn't have to, and they still decided to show up. So
That's wonderful. You're getting a lot of love, a lot of thank yous for the information, inspiring some people to even, you know, take the leap, and that's what it's about, right? Is just finding out what else is out there, how you can have those conversations, especially with youth. I give you a lot of kudos for that, especially. Oh, it looks like we do have another question. Is do you have a different student for each recorded episode?
So when we first started, we were doing groups separately by school sites. So the first episode is a different school, and then the second episode is just Pittman. But after a while, we decided to start doing coalition meetings and having students from all sites meet together and doing making conversations that way. There's actually an episode that the recording got all messed up, but they did a Black Lives Matter breakdown. and that was just MCS schools. So really, we leave it open to them. If you want to be on this, if this is something your group just wants to do and talk to each other, we can do it that way. But for the most part, right now, we're doing coalition meetings and letting them talk to each other, which is really nice because, you know, students from one town and a different town, they're having the same curriculum, same conversations, and then bringing them together to have conversations with each other is really great.
And one, go ahead.
I was just going to read the question.
Yeah, go for it.
Can you record via Zoom and drop the audio into Audacity for edit? Yes, you can. It's not the best audio, but if you have people who are using even the mic actually won't record sound into Zoom. It will pick up whatever is best. Like the person on the other end will hear you nice and clear, but the recording won't pick that up. But you can, if you have a nice, like a headset like this in a quiet room, the recording seems really nice. Like the two other girls who were on the consent, Vanessa and then Cassidy, they were just using Zoom. That was just a Zoom recording. That becomes a little hairier because everything is on one, but it has its advantages too. You know, everyone's talking on one, and then you can just cut out this giggle or, you know, or move stuff around this way. But yeah, totally.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're ready to, Marcella, did you want to share some of yours?
I just wanted to show briefly before we go into the next way you can share with audiences of you know, maybe not do this is like I had shared, I had a dream of having a podcast myself. Prior to coming on board with the partnership, I was a independent consultant, and I wanted to use my tool of voice and connecting with other people and interviewing them to find out their stories because, like I said, I am a storyteller. And so I'm going to share my screen to show you how I had the best of intentions. But now if you go to my site, and I've kept it here because again, there is that drive to one day get back to this. But I just honestly did not have the time. So if you were to go to my site now, you see that I had the Show Up for Youth. It was talking about facing ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and finding me, mindful experiences. So really interviewing people about their personal stories, what helped them. I found that this was, you know, something that people weren't talking about. So for me, a podcast made sense in the sense of I could do this privately. I could put on my earbuds, be in my car, be in my room with my laptop, whatever way I'm getting to that podcast and really tuning in and tuning into me, knowing I'm not alone and such. So I thought that this would be a good way to do it. However, what I didn't put into context was the time it would take to invest. And as one person who thought, I'll go the easy way, I'll pay someone else to host, I'll pay someone else to edit, and that got ridiculously expensive. So as you saw there were only 2 episodes, a lot of good intentions, and then it was a really big stop. I wanted to move forward, but unfortunately didn't get back to that. So now we are here to talk about how you can do these things when you have the time, you do have the effort and that idea, and all these freebies of doing it. So once again, Roni, thank you. You also inspired me. I may just get back to that. So who knows, be on the lookout for that. But until then, I really want to introduce you also to the Saves podcast, which I was introduced to as a survivor and a member of the Survivor Advisory Committee for the partnership. I was introduced by Shayla, and she has an incredible voice, incredible podcast that she produces with Chao, and I'm so excited for them to share their story with y'all. So if y'all take it away, thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. Thank you, Roni. That was very informative. I was taking notes furiously on how we could be doing things better. So, oh, there's feedback. All right. So thank you so much for the time today. You know, it's not every day you're asked to talk about your podcast, so we got super excited. And here we are today to talk about the story behind the stories. And in full transparency, we are 5 episodes old, so it's not like we're talking about something that is has been established over the years. We are also learning. We were born in June, and we are super excited to share the story behind it. We did put some slides together just so everybody can have some visual cues to, you know, what we go through. And for the next 15 or 20 minutes, you know, I invite you to join us for a short walk. We are today's speakers. It's me, Shaila. I am SAVE's Community Engagement Specialist. SAVE is, as I had mentioned earlier, SAVE is a nonprofit based in Fremont. We provide supportive services to survivors of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. And co-hosting with me today is Chao. Chao, if you'd like to go ahead and say hi.
Hi, I'm Chao. I'm a development manager here at SAVE, so I manage more the donor relations and the marketing and the newsletters here.
Thank you, Chao.
Thank you for having us.
And Chao is the technical mastermind behind the podcast. So that's how we stay alive, because I get to talk and meet wonderful people, and then I bring it back to Chao and I'm like, help me. So that's why we are both here today. It's always teamwork. And I've held different positions in SAVE. I've been here for about 3 years and over 3 years. And I think the one project that I've done, SAVE's Light program, that I have been coordinating for the last 2 years, which is our survivor advocacy and leadership program, has perhaps had the most influence in how we have approached our podcast. And you will see how, because just understanding equity, understanding what it means to break down barriers, truly understanding how do we amplify voices that are grassroots in our field became so important, and their relevance became so important. So rather than me talking, we thought we could play our little trailer that we had created in June to just introduce our podcast to all of you.
What is the history of the intimate partner violence movement? What is the latest research? Who is writing the story right now? Will this epidemic ever end? In an increasingly digital world, what is the role of technology in the domestic violence movement? How do other movements intersect with intimate partner violence? Join us on A Short Walk to explore the world of intimate partner violence with curiosity, compassion, and innovation. Look for us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Tune into our very first podcast on June 29th, where we talk about the intersectionality of intimate partner violence and Pride Month. Join us for A Short Walk.
Thank you, Chao. So that was our the first trailer, the very first bit we put out in the community, introducing what what we were hoping to do with A Short Walk. And the voice you heard was Unnati Means, that she is the third member of our team that kind of produces the podcast. She is I would say she brings in a lot of funding, ideas, resources, equipment. She's our board president. And she was the one who first came to us and said, why do we not have a podcast about intimate partner violence? So kudos to her for even putting us on this path. I want to talk a little very quickly about how it all started. So really, the big why is important, because we were talking about how we hear about intimate partner violence either as statistics or when there is something that is, like a big dramatic headline, but we were missing the conversations that are truly approaching it in a human way, about sharing the developments in the field, about talking about where the movement is going. So we wanted to create a podcast that spoke to the people in the field, but also brought information, relevance, and touch of humanity to those who might be listening and who are not aware of what intimate partner violence might be. It is an ambitious goal. We are still fine-tuning how we message it, but I think we're getting there, episode by episode. And what's in a name? I'm kind of sharing from the perspective of if anybody here is, thinking of starting or has started. The name is one of the big parts of a podcast. In a way, that's how you will be known. And for us, we chose a short walk because it spoke to the heart of self-care. There's an element of self-care when we say short walk, which is so much at the heart of our advocacy nowadays, especially with the pandemic, with IPV. So we wanted to talk about a short walk. It suggests when you can be hearing this podcast, that's when you go for a short walk. And it also was an invitation to explore, because you go for a short walk, it's a journey, it's an invitation to hear the speaker's journey, it's an invitation for the listener to go on their journey. So, we were all talking, we were like, you should be hearing it when you're on a short walk. And then we all stopped and looked at each other and say, that's it, that's our title. And then it was born during the pandemic. So it will be always very special to us because, we could have really overthought the equipment and how we set it up and how do we meet and where do we record. And we couldn't because we were in a pandemic. And we decided that we're just going to do what we can and roll with courage and lead with our vulnerability and just do it and see where it lands. So I want to say that the pandemic made it poignant, and then it simplified it on many aspects because here we were with our phones and our headphones and on a Zoom call and just getting to it, whereas we could have spent so many more months thinking about how do we get into a silent studio space or something like that. So it'll always be special. As part of how we got started, I do want to just speak very quickly to the format that we kind of came upon. We wanted the opening to have a human element, a human story, so it draws people in. And then we wanted the middle or the conversation to be about the learning or the idea or whatever, the movement or whatever is the key thing that we're bringing in. And then the closing would have a takeaway. And the takeaway wouldn't always be stated. That was something we were very, conscious of. We wanted it to be something that invites listeners to decide what they want to take away from the story. And so sometimes the speakers state it, and sometimes we leave it as a question, because who are we to dictate what a story really means to the listener? So yeah, that's kind of like the flow we were wanting to have. And on some elements, it's been successful. Some places we've moved things around, but I just wanted to share it because it comes up when you're kind of laying out your interview, what your format's going to be. And I'm going to invite Chao to actually play just the beginning from our very first episode that aired in June. You're going to hear the voice of Leslie Garcia, who is our client advocate, speaking about her experience as being part of the LGBTQ+ community and the emotions it evoked in her. So just a very quick snapshot.
You are listening to A Short Walk.
Self-reflection, queer thoughts from a brown Chicana. In light of recent events, I write to you from the perspective of a queer Chicana feminist. Today marks June 1st, the beginning of Pride Month at the time that this is written. It's also the month of my partner's birthday and our 8-year anniversary, which happens to be today. This month holds particularly beautiful, happy memories full of sunshine, frigid beach waves, and blinding smiles. This month to me holds the memory of my very first Pride Parade in SF, where I had to lie to my mom about where I was going because I wasn't out yet and hopped onto BART to the Civic Center. And boy, let me tell you, it was such a culture shock for me seeing people who didn't look like me, keep in mind, being their authentic selves. I was literally seeing.
So thank you so much. Leslie, as you can see, is a very gifted storyteller. This was a blog she had written, and we invited her to read it before we went into a conversation with Leslie and other advocates on how SAVE was stepping up to provide services for the LGBTQ plus community and what the movement could be doing better. However, it was our first episode, and what we realized, what we packed it very densely. So there was so much going on in it, but that, when we got feedback, people were like, we loved it, but we couldn't figure out what we are holding on to as it was going through so many different ideas, and we were like, oh, okay. So just to quickly share with all my peers, some of the things that we've been learning, and I'm sure we're going to learn more because we're only 5 episodes in. Chao, if you'd like to go to the next slide. Some of the things, getting started and fine tuning, because it's going to happen. As I said, why a podcast? Of course, everybody answers that for themselves. And we did too, as I had shared earlier, why we started. The theme, music, and branding. Our theme actually was developed by a youth group called the Beria Collective. We requested them for support and they came up with the theme music and we loved it. And to remember that we don't have to do it alone. If it was left to me, I would probably just be talking and I wouldn't know where to go with the file next. So, as we do with everything in our work, please partner with different talents. We don't have to do it alone. And as we were talking before the webinar started, we don't have to wait for perfection. We don't have to do it all wonderfully well at the very first time. I think starting and having a team and having a vision is wonderful. There's nothing stopping us from evolving. Less is more. That was our one key, very first learning, that because somebody is listening to us with focused intent. It is very different from radio or music playing in the background. So having something that's clear in its content and where it's landing helps the person walk away from from the conversation feeling grounded and having leaned in, versus walking away perhaps thinking, that was a lot for me to put into an earphone and put into my head directly for 40 minutes. So that was just something that we are evolving, and we'd love to hear how anybody else's podcast experience has been around that. Sound is your friend for sure. The youth showed us that, and as I hear to a lot of podcasts too. It really changes the mood of what the story is telling based on what the music is at the back. It's really amazing how the same story can sound different with what music is there in the background, or just including, like how we heard even in Roni's podcast, the laughter or the banter, or how the voice modulation changes. So that kind of goes into not over scripting it. I do script my questions as the person who's interviewing, because I want to make sure it's not my voice that takes over the podcast. But I don't at least I don't want to overscript the people I'm speaking with. So they are very, it's a very conversational tone. It is not something that this is what you say and this is what I say. I do send some guide questions out maybe a couple of weeks earlier, so people like to think about what they want to say. But my questions are scripted, the responses are not. And if the conversation, kind of flows somewhere else, allow it to, because why not? But this is about the human experience. I cannot share how many times I've cut out ums from my questioning. Like when I'm talking and I say, so what do you think about, and it doesn't sound too great with the questioner or the interviewer doing it. It's okay when the person you're talking to is doing it because they're telling their story. So those were just little things that I kind of learned as I was interviewing. And then to really plan from publishing date backwards, because for us, it takes anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, just given the other workload we are handling. Editing can take anywhere from maybe an hour or to almost a week. It depends on the interview itself, as Roni was also sharing. For us, we record on Zoom, and I like to do it on Zoom. I know the sound quality is not that, and it's something we're struggling with a little bit, but I like to record on Zoom because I can see the person I'm talking to, and then it becomes a conversation and it translates into the podcast's energy. So that's kind of where we're trying to figure out how do we navigate Zoom and still get good sound quality. So in terms of the impact and value, just wanted to share that too really quick. I think a podcast literally breaks the silence. In the world of IPV, that is like a phrase we say over and over and over again, break the silence, break the silence. What is more powerful than a podcast to break the silence? We we didn't plan it such, but almost 3 out of the 5 we've done are really survivor voices. And the more we do that, the more we feel that is where we're really amplifying the lived experience and the leadership from the grassroots that is so meaningful to our movement right now. So we feel one of the biggest impacts and values of the podcast we are bringing out is the lived experience that comes out from the stories. And we want to humanize intimate partner violence. It's not a statistic, it's not a dramatic headline, it is not it is really something that's happening in our communities every day, and there's a lot of compassion and human experience around it, and that comes out when speakers speak about what it is that they have lived through, or what is it that they're trying to do. And even the leaders are human leaders, they're not on pedestals. So everybody is a human, and IPV is a very human issue that we're all trying to deal with in a compassionate manner. We want to lean into bringing equity in the field. We want to help deprofessionalize the systems. It sounds like a very lofty goal, but I do think that the more we amplify voices from the grassroots, the more it's possible. Definitely, especially during the pandemic, the podcast created connections. It created connections beyond what we thought was possible. There's a connection between the person who's speaking and the interviewer, between the organizations, between the community and the podcast, between the story and the listener. It's just a web of beautiful connections if one looks at what a podcast really brings out. And how it's been received, we heard feedback, and we also were kind of a little bit blown away by, oh yes, that's how it works. So we've got feedback saying, oh, I didn't know that about IPV and LGBTQ plus communities. We've got feedback saying this helped me ground back into my self-care mode, brought me back into my power. We've got feedback and text from other survivors saying that was really validating. When we get such, even if it's a little text or a line or an email that drops in, we know that somewhere we are building the ripple. We are part of the ripple that's growing. And that's very empowering. What more do we want from our efforts than to just grow the ripple a little wider? So we're so grateful we're able to do this as a team. Chao, if you'd like to talk a little bit about the logistics, because I know that's where we had a lot of learnings too.
Thank you, Shayla, for sharing such a depth knowledge with our audience. So for logistics, we landed on Buzzsprout because we were looking for something that's easy to use, and we can also upload it to all the platforms that they have, all the directories. For example, the iHeartRadio, the Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It just publish it on all the platforms for you. So the more that you're out there, the more that people can find you, and the more listeners that you can acquire. Initially, the setup for Buzzsprout, it's difficult to get registered on all the sites that you would like to have. It takes some time, especially for Apple Podcasts. It takes about 2 weeks for them to verify you. So you wanted to put that in mind for your initial launch dates, that you wanted to plan 2 weeks ahead for you to be out there. For our publishing and our marketing, I really recommend everybody to leverage what you already have. For example, if your organization already have newsletter, invite people to listen to it on your newsletter, from your newsletter. Social media, post it on social media so people know that, hey, we're doing a podcast. Invite people to listen to your the previews that we did for the 1 minute one. Actually, that one got so many listens because people are so interested about what this is about. And then just ask people to share, ask your friends, your colleagues, ask them for feedback, and then share. For equipment, we did the most basic. We didn't buy any headphones. We have speakers from different parts in California, so we can really ship any microphone and expensive equipment to them. So we just use headphones and a quiet space, and we use Zoom. Like Shayla shared, we can see people, so the energy feels different. Also, Zoom is awesome. They just download the audio for you. You can either save it on your computer, you can save it on Zoom Cloud, or you can save it on Google Drive if you like. And then we just edit it, and after that, as you can see, you edit it from your computer and you upload on Buzzsprout, and Buzzsprout spread it for you. Initially, when we started it, funding is really unknown. However, we have a very supportive leadership and management team. They led us to use our work time to produce this podcast in planning, executing, interviewing, editing, and everything. But in the future, we're hopeful that we can found foundations and charities that will sponsor our podcast, so that these are not paying from SAFE's general expenses.
Thank you, Chao. Challenges, of course, there are so many, and we're almost at the end of the 20 minutes. So I'm just going to highlight probably the biggest challenge that is for me, that is the time and the energy and keeping it real. Because as you start going through episodes, you can definitely fall into a tried and tested routine, or just get really overwhelmed with the timeline. The first two, you're just running on adrenaline. By the fourth and the fifth, it is work you're committed to, and that's where you have to really be kind to yourself. If your podcast is a week late, it's okay. If my November podcast didn't go out, and I'm just telling myself it's okay. Yeah, I was really overwhelmed, and I'm editing it now. So yeah, keeping the conversation real, because if it becomes too abstract, then the listener, it has to be relatable for the people listening. So keep your target audience in mind. And then as Chao was mentioning, the reach, because after you do all the work, there is the whole element of making sure it reaches the audience, it connects to the community, and it's heard. And much as it might rile you at times, the honest critical feedback is beautiful from people who are listening, and it can really, you can be like, but that's not what I was thinking, but hey, that's how it's landing, so you're gonna have to live with it. So we're just going to close out really quick with a very short, very short poem that's recited by Beatriz Garcia. That was our September podcast on self-care. Beatriz is one of our Light program advocates. She created a series of self-care workshops and was talking about it, and this is her closing out. And we thought this would be the best way to close out our talk as well today, truly amplifying the voices that are leading in to grow the movement. Thank you, Chao.
In life, and Tupac Shakur is one of them. He's a rapper, but also he was an activist. And so there is a poem called "The Rose That Grew from the Crack in the Concrete." I'd like to recite this poem. So it says, "Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's laws wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from the concrete when no one else ever cared." Just want you to know that even when we're not recognized out there, you are recognized. I see you, I hear you, I feel you, and I'm with you. And we live, and we long live each and one of the roses that keep moving forward, that keep pushing through, even through a pandemic, even through uncertainty, even through anxiety. We're still here, we're still together, and we're gonna rebuild each other.
Thank you. I always tear up when I hear Beatrice's voice sharing that. So that was it. Some resources are on the slide, but that's pretty much our story behind the stories. And thank you all for coming along with us on a short walk.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I appreciate the steps, just the reality, like I had mentioned with Roni previously, the transparency of keeping it real and what that really looks like. I laughed when you said, the first two episodes, you're just on adrenaline. Yeah, right there. I was so ready to go. And then it got real. And it was like, oh, wow, I don't have time. I don't have money. I don't know how to do it. So I appreciate your brains, all of you, like really researching and doing the work, because there is back work, right? It's not just we go now. We got to plan accordingly if we want to sustain the big one, right? We talk about that all the time. So this is an opportunity to open up for questions for everyone. Unmute yourself, ask in the chat. Thank you, Chao, for putting in the podcast. You know, we really want to find out, where are you all still struggling? And most importantly, highlighting the reality of why these demographics specifically would tune in to a podcast. You know, I mean, I'm asking you, Shaila, what do you think, even just coming up with a short walk, which I love, it's so fitting because, you know, as a survivor, my gosh, you know, talking about this stuff, woo, yeah, let's go take a walk. So in your experience in having this podcast now, who do you feel is really tuning in and why?
And that's actually the golden question. And that's something we are tracking too, to see where and how is this being received. So, and Chao, please feel free to jump in. From the limited experience of 5 podcasts, I think definitely we are seeing the podcasts being heard by the advocates in the field, because they are bringing in perspective that is something new, that is being either born in the field or amplifying survivor voices. And both of those perspectives are really needed to keep our work fresh and to keep us going. That is why before we talk to or we decide on who we're going to interview, I do have a conversation with the person that has got nothing to do with the podcast at all, to say, what is the story? Because there's so many things we could be talking about. What is it that you feel would resonate with the community? Give a learning to the people who are working in that field, and yet also speak to the heart and the passion of who you are, because we don't want to stage it and we don't want to artificially construct something. So that one talk that we have even before the podcast interview is actually been amazing. You know, Marcella, you and I had it too. I learned so much, so inspiring. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that the place where we want to grow it is the community, because I feel like people who are in the IPV field understand its value, are leaning in. But IPV itself comes with a lot of stigma. I mean, who wants to listen to IPV on a short walk if that's not something, it's not your world, or you don't have a connection to it? So we're really trying to see how do we amplify the positioning or the messaging or its placement to broaden the reach. Because it's a human thing, you know, the stories, you don't have to be a survivor advocate, you're in the community and you're part of it. When we say things have to change, we are the things that have to change. So I hope that answers in some way.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely does. And I appreciate you sharing your process of having that pre-interview. I think that so first off, that was very different for me as someone who has been interviewed from different just different articles and whatnot, whatever the format was. I've never had an interview before the interview. And I loved that because it really did allow, I believe, you to tap into that message. And I love that what about your presentation, you know, really being clear of less is more. That again was my big thing was, you know, I had the thought of, I'll do a podcast about the ACE quiz, you know, those 10 questions. And we're just going to talk about one though, right? You know, we're going to stick on that one, but even sticking on that one sometimes will veer you off. And so, like you said, unless you know what they want to actually talk about, it becomes your story.
Yeah,
right? So I really appreciated that.
Thank you. I feel like, if I can just quickly add on, I feel like that 40 minutes when we talk is very sacred in a way. And if we want people to share a vulnerable story, then they have to be able to trust us. So to see our face, to hear our voice, to understand our intent is important. At least that's the approach how we are working with on the podcast. So.
Absolutely. And just like somebody had asked previously with Roni and youth, right, did you have this relationship? You do need to have that trust. Exactly. Absolutely. Looks like we have a question here. Or maybe it's not a question. Would like to. Okay, they're sharing another podcast. Wonderful. Yes, please share your resources, everyone. If you know of something that is in this vein of prevention, intervention, uplifting voices of those that are, usually silenced. We're not listening to survivors. We're not listening to youth. We don't believe them. But why? So I love the opportunity to take this short walk to speak from the heart and really get to those stories. Any other questions anyone has out there? Who's fired up and ready to start one? This is the foundation. You have your template now, right? Like these beautiful resources, free stuff.
I have a question. Sorry, it's kind of loud out here. When we were thinking about what our audience was, because we know intimate partner violence affects everyone, we talk about it, just it doesn't matter. But then also all these really wonderful conversations that we've had lately through the partnership about addressing systemic racism and oppression and diversifying our communities and conversations of those stories. My brain keeps going to that, and so I want to honor that and keep that consistent, but also be realistic about how difficult it is to do these. And so I'm like listening to Roni, and I'm like, I want to focus on you, and create a program or a channel for that. I also want to do a Latinx run. I'm the Latinx prevention advocate. And so my brain is just getting ahead of myself. And I'm struggling with that. Like, I know we need to just start. Is it a good idea, a bad idea? Like, I'm just struggling with how do we tell honest stories, but not overwhelm our audience and our sponsors. I just want to be truthful and give authentic spaces. And I love this idea with Roni of like young people talking to young people about young people for young people, and so I'm thinking about other communities too. So I don't know how to resolve that. And I just need someone to bring me down because I'm just overly excited, but then I'm also getting like already stressed. And I do that to myself. I don't know why, but that's all I got to say.
Roni, would you like to share your experience with youth? I would love to hear that personally, as far as what that looks like in tailoring any of those episodes and such, and that idea.
My experience with the youth is pretty specific to them. I know them really well, and I know who is good at doing the research but doesn't want to talk, and who's good at talking but doesn't want to do the research and stuff like that. But I think to the effect of what you were saying is all of those things can be included in one podcast. Maybe the podcast is about communities talking to other communities. So you do have an episode about youth talking to youth, or Latinx talking to Latinx, or LGBTQ, whatever, and providing the space to have those conversations with people who have the same experience, but it looks a little different, or who relate to one another. But all of that can be incorporated into one podcast, and in different shows you can do all of those things. I think the most important in all of the podcasts that I've done one for my other job. I did one for the workshop, and then this one with the students, is really knowing who you're talking to. I think we said that earlier, and sitting down. I mean, the one that I did for the podcast workshop, we sat down with like cheese and wine, and it was just a buddy of mine, and we just started talking and listening to her story and giving her the opportunity to talk. And then that, I think, becomes the most exciting part of it, is that in all of those things that I've done, I'm giving them a platform to talk to me or to each other. And yeah, just kind of starting with one idea and kind of going, okay, well, what would I want to talk about? What are the big questions that I have, or the big points that these students want to make? And then we with the students, okay, we want to talk about consent. Okay, so we're going to define consent. What is consent? Who gives consent? You know, what is the violation if somebody doesn't, you know, respect your consent? What are boundaries, stuff like that, and putting them down, and then giving them the space to riff a little bit, but have like a study guide almost, you know, and that has helped me the most. I think that all of those conversations are beautiful and can totally happen, and you can totally do it. And just remember that maybe the big idea is people are talking to people, right? And we want to have those voices heard and let them feel welcome. So how do I do that every time I put something like that together? I hope that helps.
That was very helpful for me, even. That was beautiful. Yes, I think that's what these podcasts do. A lovely way of doing is connecting communities with one another, communities that would never even listen to one another. Again, this is the power of the podcast, is that nobody has to know, right? Like, this is our guilty pleasure, whether we're listening to something just for shits and giggles, or we're listening to something because it fills our heart and it inspires us to take a stand on something. Power of podcasts. I totally recommend you to get into that vein of, you know, where is that idea? I love Roni's suggestion of just, you know, building on that community. This is you giving them a platform, and everybody has an opportunity to talk in it. Any other questions?
I was just going to say, I also appreciate what Shailaja had shared earlier of like, give yourself permission and space and grace with yourself. Because I love the ideas that you have, and definitely want to hear if you're able to get those started. But also just kind of finding a pace that works for you. Because sometimes there's so many conversations that we want to have, and they are so important and they are so critical. And it's, what is a pace that is going to be navigable for me? And starting with one, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Like we've been talking a lot internally about kind of decolonizing our approaches. Like, it doesn't have to be this white professionalism of everything has to be exactly perfect the first time you put it out because it's carrying the weight of the name, etc. It's a conversation, and we want people to engage. And so giving space for it, it's going to go however it's going to go. And moving from that place, and knowing that it's, you know, sometimes we can really get hard on ourselves when we have something that goes wrong, or, you know, you're starting a virtual training and then the fire alarm goes off and you have to exit the building. You know, shit happens, and it's going to be fine. You know, you're still going to be able to get it done. And it's, you know, we've all had those experiences, and particularly as we are all navigating this shelter in place and what that looks like in the varying restrictions. So are our audiences, so are our communities. And so the more real and authentic that we can be in those conversations, the better.
I think something that you said that's so important is that it doesn't have to be this categorized, like, in this bubble thing. I think that, especially as an advocate with students, like, part of that process was, I don't want you to sound like, you know, all of this uppity professional. Like, nobody cares about that. Like, they care about what you want to say, what is your story, and how you say it, how you tell it. That's going to come through 100%. I always tell people, like, when I started an office job, I felt like an outside cat that was brought inside. Like, I'm happy to be there, but like, I just don't understand what's happening. So sometimes I don't fit the mold of someone who would regularly work in an office, but instead of trying to be this odd professional version of myself. I just came as myself and said, listen, I don't understand this. And this is how I would approach things. And how can I bring this to this table? And that has opened up so many beautiful creative opportunities for me through Haven, especially. And learning that and offering that to the students has created that really beautiful, truthful, authentic conversation that they get to have with each other and giggle and laugh and do whatever. And that's what makes it interesting and worth listening to, I think. So yeah, I think however you want to tell that story, or however that person wants to tell that story, like let them do that, and don't try to, pigeonhole it into something else that can be stifling.
I couldn't agree more, Ronnie, because the first question when you approach anybody for the podcast is they're like, what should we talk about? And I'm like, whatever you want to talk about. Like, I don't know what we want to talk about. So to not answer that question and really let it evolve to wherever, whatever they think the 40 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever they want to use it for. That's what we're there for. So couldn't agree more.
And we've got a great question from Holly Grace with Haven of, since these pods are being broadcast widely, are there any conversations happening, particularly with youth, around the possibility of trolling or negative and inappropriate comments from public audiences? As we know, if you've ever read the comments under any articles, it can get intense. So I wonder, how are folks having those conversations, or are you having those conversations?
I think that with the youth, there are different ways to not even have those comments like put up there, like on Instagram. You just like don't even allow people to put comments, because first of all, if you're trolling on a high school podcast, like get a life, really. But not even giving them the opportunity to do that. But I do think that there's an opportunity to have a conversation very honestly about, like, listen, some people are just, they want to complain or do stuff, you know what I mean? And we know that is a form of, like, maybe this person is really hurt, and they're coming from a place of hurt. And so let's not take it to heart and hope that person finds some sort of healing or whatever. But I haven't had any negative comments or trolling or anything like that. I think that it's definitely possible, but I think that we just address that very honestly too. And yeah, if it's like a podcast where I was doing with, like, one of my friends or whatever, like my answer would be like, who cares? Like, let it hurt for a second and then remember that, will you remember it in 5 years, 5 minutes, really? Like, probably not. I don't know if I answered that question.
I was just gonna say that since we speak to survivors, not youth, because of course the youth have a totally different dynamic in some ways. When we are speaking to survivors, I think it's something we have a very direct conversation on how public the podcast is. What question is being asked, to what extent do you share your story? Because there is no obligation for anybody to share their story beyond what feels refilling or healthy or useful. So it could, we always offer the option of, you don't even have to use your name if that's what makes it safer for you. Nobody has taken up that option yet, but yes, something to be very present and cognizant of that, especially in the IPB world where safety, privacy, and just self-care is really important. That we and just understanding the dynamic of being the interviewer. Sometimes somebody who you're interviewing may think they don't have the right to say no, and they always have the right to say, that's not a question I want to answer. And to just, I have stopped the interview a couple of times to just say, I felt we were hesitating. It's okay, we could skip this question, or do you want me to rephrase it? So that's part of, I think, hosting. I don't know how it is for you, Roni, because I would assume the youth also have that question of confidentiality, or how consent or how it's feeling.
Yeah, there are like a few examples in the consent podcast of, moments, and we kind of just tell them like, if you don't want to share it, outside of this group, like maybe we pick something different. And like one girl talks about some random other student smelling her hair and how that creeped her out, you know what I mean? And just kind of keep it on a surface level, just so we don't put them in a position, because youth as well kind of feels like I'm in a position of power. If I'm asking you to do something, then you may think that you have to do it because I'm your facilitator. But
Right.
really, like, we never ever want them to feel pressured into saying anything or put them in a dangerous situation where they go, oh man, I really didn't want that out. So I always try to keep it light with them when we're recording anything, and keep it very surface level, and stuff that happens to students in passing all the time, like someone smelling your hair or whatever, like giving you a hug without asking, and stuff like that. So we always try to keep it on the surface so they feel safe and they feel inclined to share stories like, oh wow, yeah, that reminds me of this, which also happened, like whatever. And keeping them on a topic and moving also, I think, helps them from
Going to.
yes, being in a moment that gets too deep, which is not to say that we don't want them to share those things with us. It's just that maybe this is not the setting for that. And if you want to talk about that at a different time, you can talk to me and we can work that out.
Thank you.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left. So if we have any other questions, we have just a few moments for that.
I actually, sorry, while we are waiting for the question, I forgot to mention that I do typically share the finished podcast with the person we have interviewed, so that they have a chance to really say yes to what's going out. And, we are prepared to pull it back if at any point when they hear the final and they say, no, I really, because this is really about their story. So I realized I didn't say that, but listening to Roni, I realized, yeah, we do have like the final check. We're like about to be released. Is this sounding good?
We do that as well. So we've done a lot of like PSAs and interviews and like video stuff too. And with the podcast and stuff, we always send it out first and say, hey, this is the time that we're releasing this, in the next couple of days by this time. If this is not something you want or you're happy with, let us know and let's figure out how we can fix it.
Yeah.
A lot of times if it's that I said too much or like or whatever, I'm like, okay, we're not gonna record the whole thing. Like now we know next time, we can take a breath and take more time. But if it's something like I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about and I'm super embarrassed and whatever, then we stop and we readjust and we say, okay, well, this is the time that we can re-record. Which part would you like to re-record, and keep them very, very specific. But we always give them a chance to say, no, thank you, and let them freak out a little bit and do what we can to fix it.
That's much appreciated. Yeah, that I really appreciate that, because these are, there's stories. And so making sure, you just reminded me that, yeah, that's best practices, everyone, best practices. Consent is key. Thank you all so much, Roni, Shayla, Chao. You all are amazing. I really appreciate your expertise in this. If you all have any questions, this doesn't mean that you can't ask them. You can still send them to Miranda and myself. I'll put my email in the chat. Y'all please do the same. And we will be sending out the recording with any resources as soon as it's out. Otherwise, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope to hear more podcasts out there.
Thank you, everyone. And Tyson, thank you for sharing yours. We'll definitely link that in our page. And as I said, the webinar is being recorded, so we will have this uploaded and we will be sending out a brief survey just to get some feedback from folks, and look forward to having you on our next webinar. I was about to say podcast. We're not doing a podcast right now, but I've got a lot of ideas. So
We
thank
can do
you.
it.
We can. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So much.
Bye, folks.